So, if Cisco is no longer the emissary, can he still be the Cisco? I mean, that's his name. It'd be weird if the prophet started calling the new guy the Cisco. Though if I were the new guy, I wouldn't mind. What the hell kind of name is Akorem? No offense to any Bajarans in the audience, but did his parents name him after the sound you make when you're trying to cough something up? This is a review of the Star Trek Deep Space Nine episode, Accession. If you have not seen this episode and you don't want to know who the prophets are going to side with, the lead protagonist or the guy we just met, be warned, spoilers beyond this point. Oh, those wacky prophets are at it again. Let's see how they try to turn Captain Sisko's life upside down this time. We open on O'Brien and Bashir in O'Brien's quarters. They're scrambling to get the place cleaned up because today Keiko and Molly are coming back to the station after spending most of the past several months on Bajor on a scientific expedition. O'Brien greets Keiko and Molly as they come off their transport shuttle, and Molly adorably lets it slip that she's got a brother on the way because Keiko is pregnant. O'Brien's like, "You're pregnant? Is it mine?" "Of course it's yours. I told you, Sabar has a low sperm count." "But how is this possible? I thought you used a condom." "No, I thought you were going to pull out." "I thought you were going to pull out." Regardless of who was supposed to pull out what from where, O'Brien and Keiko are having another baby, so that's a new fresh hell that awaits our chief of operations of perpetual suffering, and it kicks off a delightful subplot in this episode about O'Brien readjusting to having his family around after getting used to living alone, and missing hanging out with his best buddy Dr. Bashir, and Keiko eventually realizing this and contriving to have O'Brien and Bashir spend some time together on the holosuite, because there's nothing worse than a mopey O'Brien, and now that I've told you about it, I'm going to ignore it for the rest of the summary, because even though I like it, it's really not the most interesting part of the episode. The most interesting part of the episode starts when Captain Sisko, in his role as the emissary to the prophets, which makes him a revered figure in the Bajaran religion, bestows a blessing on a newly married couple, and indicates to Dax that maybe his ambivalence toward being the emissary is starting to wane, and he's beginning to enjoy it. Then Sisko is called to ops for an emergency. An unscheduled ship is coming through the wormhole. Even more exciting, it's a centuries-old Bajaran light ship with a single occupant on board, still alive. They beam the occupant to the infirmary, where he introduces himself as the emissary. What? How can this guy be the emissary when Sisko is the emissary? Because Sisko's definitely the emissary. They even called the first episode of the series Emissary. It was all about that. There can't be two emissaries. Can there? Maybe there can be. I mean, they never actually said there can be only one, did they? They could be commissaries. That might work. When they have bad days, they can commiserate. I'm not sorry. Anyway, this new old guy explains that his light ship was damaged in a storm and he was injured, and then he was pulled into the wormhole, though he didn't know that at the time. He found himself in the presence of the prophets, who healed him and kept him with them until sending him back just now. He is surprised to learn that he's been gone for a couple 100 years, and a lot has happened since he left, mainly the Cardassian occupation. When he gives his name, Akoram Lan, he's also surprised to learn that Kira knows who he is. He's a poet, and in the centuries since he disappeared, his work has become revered. He's considered one of Bajor's greatest writers. Obviously, Sisko thinks this guy is a better fit to be the emissary than he is. He talks it over with Dax in his office, and it does sound pretty reasonable. Akoram is actually Bajaran. He's already known and loved by the people. His life seems a more obvious fit for the prophecies about the emissary than Sisko's. Plus, Starfleet will be thrilled when he tells them, because they were never too wild about this emissary business. Sisko makes up his mind he will publicly step aside and endorse Akoram as the new, rightful emissary. Everyone seems to accept Akoram as the new emissary immediately, which confuses Odo. He asks Kira, if Akorem is the emissary, does that mean Captain Sisko never was the emissary? Kira's like, no, I don't think so. Odo says, but if there can only be one emissary, and Sisko was the emissary, and Akorem is the emissary, that doesn't make sense, does it? And Kira says, that's the thing about faith. It doesn't have to make sense. If you don't have it, you can't understand it. But if you do have it, no explanation is needed. Which is a very good description of how religious faith works, though I personally prefer to paraphrase Archie Bunker on the matter and say that faith is something that you believe that nobody in their right mind would believe. Bajorans gather on the promenade, and Sisko watches the live stream from his office as Akorem gives his first speech as the new emissary. He says, so I've been gone for a while, but they filled me in on what happened while I was away, the occupation and all of that. Sounds like it really sucked, but lucky for you, I've got just the thing to fix up Bajor. You know what we need to bring back? The caste system. We had it before I left 200 years ago, and that's just what our society needs now to shake off those post-occupation doldrums, rigid segregation based on arbitrary social classes. Who doesn't love that? Judging from the reactions of some in the crowd, including Kira, who applauds but reluctantly, there are lots of people who doesn't love that. Later, Sisko meets with Akorem and Vedic Porta and says, Akorem, I watched your speech, nice job. I did have one question though. What the fuck was that? Akorem says, hey man, it's what the prophets want. It's why they saved me and sent me back to be the emissary. They're all about that caste system. Porta, Akorem's wingman, jumps in like, yeah, and once the people get used to following the caste system again, we're going to make it illegal not to follow it. And people who don't live according to their assigned social class will be shoved to their deaths from a great height. Or maybe we'll just deport them. We can talk about it. Returning to the caste system creates a lot of problems, large scale and small scale. The large-scale problem, and the one which concerns Sisko the most, is that if Bajor institutes a caste system, that will probably be the end of its prospects for Federation membership. Legally enforced social hierarchies and the institutionalized discrimination that go along with them aren't really the Federation's vibe. They're more chilled out and laid back and live and let live, and occasionally they give away inhabited planets to fascist empires, but that's more of a sometimes thing. The small-scale problem with returning to the caste system is dramatized through Kira, who, as a faithful follower of the Bajoran religion, is trying to go along with what the new emissary says, but is struggling. When she finds herself without a chair in the cafe, a Bajoran woman from a lower caste stands up and insists that Kira take her chair. Please, the woman says, I insist. You sit down. I'm unworthy. I'm lower than dirt. Do you want to hit me? I deserve it. Just for being born, hit me. Please, just hit me. It'll help me to remember my place. Things are so much better this way, aren't they? Kira, not being a cis-hetero white man from Earth, is unaccustomed to this level of unearned privilege and doesn't like it. She also doesn't like the fact that, since she belongs to the artist class and not the military class, if she wants to live according to the rules of the caste system, she'll have to resign her position as First Officer of Deep Space Nine. She tells Sisko she intends to leave as soon as he can find someone to take her post. Sisko's not happy about it, but he accepts it. Kira decides if she's going to be an artist, she might as well get to work making some art. She tries to sculpt some birds, but just ends up with a collection of clay lumps that could be described as birds in an abstract sense, but don't really represent what Kira was trying to do. She's like, this sucks. Making art is so hard. Can't I just tell the computer to make me some bird sculptures and then say I made them? That's the same thing as being an artist, right? Meanwhile, Sisko's doubts about the actions of the new emissary and the ramifications for Bajor have manifested in a psychotic episode. He has trouble sleeping and gets up and goes for a walk on the deserted promenade. Then the lights go out and he finds himself confronted by a ghostly vision of Kai Opaka. Sisko says, "What are you doing here?" And Kai Opaka's like, "Who are you?" Sisko says, "What's happening?" And Kai Opaka's like, "Who. And Sisko says, "Opaka? Don't you know me?" And Opaka says, "How can I know you when you don't even know yourself?" Sisko visits Bashir in the infirmary, who tells him what he experienced was probably a flashback, a residual vision from one of his past encounters with the prophets. Bashir gives him a shot to prevent it from happening again, then asks, "What do you think the vision means?" And Sisko says, "Well, I think it means that I'm crazy." Odo calls Sisko to the promenade where someone, a Bajoran Vedic, has been killed, apparently having fallen from the second level. While they stand there wondering what happened, Vedic Porta, emissary Akorim's wingman, steps up and says, "I know what happened. I killed the motherfucker." Odo's like, "Why?" And Porta says, "I told him he had to resign from our religious order because he comes from an unclean class. His people are meant to prepare the dead for burial. There's no place in an order of monks for that shit. That is gross." But he refused to resign, so I shoved him to his death from a great height. What choice did I have? Sisko's like, "All right, that's it." He calls Akorim back for a meeting and says, "Dude, if I had any idea how badly you would fuck up Bajoran society, I never would have stepped aside to let you be the emissary. I had trouble accepting the role before, but after this, you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna take it back. I want to be the emissary again." Akorim says, "The prophets made me the emissary. So if we both believe we're the emissary, what happens next?" Sisko says, "I don't want to ask the people of Bajor to choose between us. That could lead to bloodshed. And I don't want us to sit here arguing over our competing interpretations of the ancient sacred texts either." Akorim's like, "Well, historically, spilling blood and arguing over interpretations of sacred texts are the only ways of resolving religious disputes, so what else you got?" And Sisko says, "We're gonna go ask the prophets." So the two of them hop into a runabout, fly into the wormhole, wait for the prophets to notice them, and when they are whisked away to the ethereal plane, Akorim says, "Which one of us do you love best?" One of the prophets says, "What? What do you want?" Sisko says, "The Bajorans believe you have chosen one of us to be your emissary. Which one of us have you chosen?" "What?" Akorim says, "You saved me. You healed me and kept me with you to spare me the occupation. And then you sent me back to Bajor so I could be your emissary and bring back the caste system. Right?" "You're saying a lot. The caste system is from what you would call the past. It is part of what was, and for beings like you, what was can never be again. The Sisko taught us that." And Sisko's like, "Yes!" Akorim's like, "Then Sisko really is the emissary. You just used me to teach him a lesson, to get him to accept that you chose him. You should have let me die." And one of the prophets is like, "We can make that happen." But Sisko steps up and says, "No, don't kill him. Send him home. To his own time. Let him return to the Bajor of the past and be with his family." The prophets are like, "Sure, whatever," and a grateful Akorim vanishes. Sisko remains for a moment, and a prophet in the form of Kai Opaka approaches and says, "What are you still doing here?" Sisko says, "I still have questions." Prophet Opaka says, "We are of Bajor." Sisko's like, "Yeah, but what does that mean?" "You are of Bajor." "I see. Hey, can one of you come back with me and explain what happened to Akorim? Because if I return to the station without him, the others might have some questions. Bye." Sisko returns to the station. Apparently, nobody questions my rival for the role of emissary was magically transported back in time to live out his days with his family, and that's why only one of us came back from the wormhole, no other reason story. The people of Bajor happily abandon the return to their caste system. Kira gifts one of her failed bird sculptures to Sisko as a memento. Sisko's like, "This is still raw clay. Aren't you supposed to fire it or something?" Kira's like, "I don't know. What you reading?" It just so happens that Sisko is reading a poem written by Akorim, a poem which he didn't originally finish. But after the prophets returned him to the past and he was able to resume his life, he did finish it. Kira is confused. If the prophets changed history and he finished the poem in the past, why does she, or anyone else for that matter, remember the unfinished version? Sisko just kind of shrugs. And then a Bajoran father and daughter approach Sisko, and the father says, "Emissary, we're having my daughter's space bat mitzvah tomorrow, and we were hoping you could throw a blessing her way." Sisko's like, "It would be my pleasure, man. Just make sure I get my money." The end. I know not everyone enjoys the Bajoran religion stuff on Deep Space Nine, and honestly, not every episode where that is foregrounded is a good episode, but I think Accession is a very good episode. because it deals with Bajoran religion and religion in general in an intelligent way that emphasizes how it impacts the lives of our characters, believers and non-believers alike. Sometimes that impact is positive, and sometimes it's negative, and we see both of those in this episode. For Kira, representing the believers, it's obvious that her faith gives her a lot of solace and adds meaning to her life, but that same faith also threatens to totally derail her life when she thinks she's being told to abandon her career and go off to become an artist, a sort of life she never wanted and has no aptitude for. Doing what God wants you to do can be wonderful, but only if you and God are in agreement, it seems. For Sisko, the non-believer who has been thrust into a religious role, we see him struggle first with carrying out his responsibilities as the emissary, then with living without them. He starts to like being the emissary once he gets used to it, and once he sees the happiness he can bring to people through it. He comes to regret passing the role to a Korem, not out of ego, not because he misses the adoration that comes from being the emissary, but because he misses being able to make a positive impact on the people of Bajor, and he sees what a negative impact a Korem's outdated ideas are having. Religion isn't inherently a good thing or a bad thing. It can be one or the other, depending on what it's being used to do. Maybe the most important character in the episode in terms of the portrayal of religion is Vedic Porta. We first meet him escorting the young married couple in to meet with Sisko. He seems kind and humble. Kira obviously likes him. But when a Korem becomes emissary and announces a return to the caste system, Porta, the happy and gentle old monk, becomes an unquestioning enforcer of the new doctrine. His serenity, once reassuring, becomes chilling when we see how calmly he's able to rationalize murdering a fellow monk who resisted a Korem's changes. Through Porta, we see how frighteningly short the road from piety to fanaticism truly is. Oddly enough, the least essential character in the piece might be a Korem himself. That's no reflection on Richard Libertini, the actor who plays a Korem. He gives an excellent performance, but a Korem as a person isn't as important as the chaos he threatens to cause, and what he represents. And what he represents, as the prophets state explicitly during their encounter in the wormhole, is the past. That's what makes him dangerous. It's not that he's a bad guy. He seems mostly oblivious to the glaringly apparent problems with what he's proposing, but he also comes across as a person of sincere faith who genuinely wants to help his people. The problem is, his solution is to turn his society backward instead of leading it forward. He literally says in his big speech that if they just return to the old ways, it will be as if the occupation never happened. No one, no matter how well-meaning they are, who tells you pain and trauma can be erased like that, should ever be believed, even if they claim to speak for God. In fact, especially if they claim to speak for God. Accession is written by Jane Espenson, who also wrote the 7th season Star Trek The Next Generation episode Force of Nature, and directed by prolific Trek director Les Landau, who ultimately helmed dozens of episodes of TNG, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, and Enterprise. It's a very well-made episode. In terms of direction, I love the way the transition into Sisko's Kai Opaka vision is handled. He walks down the fully lit promenade, then the camera passes behind the station directory, obscuring the shot for a moment, and when the shot clears, all the lights have gone out, and we're suddenly in spooky territory. It's smooth and simple and incredibly effective. But what really makes this episode stand out is what it has to say. The prophets are Star Trek's closest analogs to the kinds of gods most religious people believe in today. Most other godlike beings encountered by Star Trek characters are more like the gods of the Greek and Roman pantheons, essentially humans, just with incredible powers. The prophets are much more like the god of the Abrahamic religions. They are remote and mysterious. Their interactions with mortals are vague and contradictory and demanding of interpretation. The brilliant thing about how the creators of Star Trek Deep Space Nine present the prophets is that the prophets retain that unknowable quality even though they appear on screen and directly interact with our heroes. Of all the godlike beings we meet in Star Trek, they are the most godlike according to our modern sense of God, because you can be standing right in front of them, listening to them speak to you, and you still have no idea what they're talking about or what you're supposed to do. We see that uncertainty running in both directions. In Accession, as in other episodes that feature appearances by the prophets seem just as confused and unsettled by their encounters with mortals as the mortals do. They aren't hostile exactly. They seem willing to help, and they do help, but they maintain this slightly annoyed, slightly impatient, what are you doing here attitude that adds another layer of tension to all of their interactions with our heroes. And because during those interactions, the prophets take the forms of other characters, encounters with them always have a surreal, dreamlike quality. From my perspective as an atheist, as an outsider, the prophets are one of the most, I hate to say it, but I've got to say it, I'm going to say it, faithful depictions of what modern religious people imagine it would be like to meet their gods. What would it be like to stand in the presence of a power, a wisdom, an experience so dissimilar and so profoundly beyond your own? I have no idea, but once it's interpreted by our humble mortal minds, it might be something like what we see on Deep Space Nine. The most important difference between how Deep Space Nine imagines the gods and how most real-life religious folk imagine them is that on Deep Space Nine, it's suggested that the gods should be just as open to learning from us as we are to learning from them. That's a provocative idea in an era when religion is dominated by faith in a God who seems mostly interested in teaching us obedience. Obedience to God, and obedience to the institutions who claim to speak for God. In Accession and elsewhere, the creators of Deep Space Nine suggest that if we're meant to listen to the gods should at least be willing to listen to us, too. And the show reminds us that divine guidance, if you believe in such a thing, will only take you so far, which is why, even if you have a direct line to God, you've still got to be able and willing to think for yourself. Those are my thoughts on Accession. What do you think of this episode? Please share your thoughts with me in the comments if you'd like to support this channel, and I sure wish you would. If you can afford it, you can do so by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Steve Shives, becoming a channel member by clicking the join button, or by making a one-time gift by clicking the thanks button, or via PayPal or Venmo. Links are in the description. Please join me next time as this Gods and Monsters batch concludes with a review of an episode of Star Trek Enterprise titled Observer Effect. That's next time. See you then. Thanks for watching, and take care, everybody.